Have you ever felt frozen in a moment when action was necessary? Maybe it was speaking up in a meeting, asking someone out, starting that project you have been dreaming about, or making a life-changing decision. And then, as the minutes turn to hours, you tell yourself, "Weak, I am not brave enough. I just can't do it." What if I told you that none of that is true? What if I told you that hesitation and self-doubt are not signs of personal failure, but symptoms of a cycle that has quietly been controlling your life? Most people mistake avoidance for cowardice. They blame themselves for inaction, thinking they lack courage, when in reality, the fear inside them is doing all the work. That tightness in your chest, that pause before you take a step forward, it is not weakness. It is a signal, a pattern that has been ingrained over thousands of years, designed to keep you safe. But here's the catch. Safety is not always growth. Safety is not always freedom. And when fear dictates your choices, you are not living, you are surviving. In the next few minutes, we are going to explore how some of the greatest minds and warriors in history have understood this cycle and found a way out. You will learn why fear feels so real, why hesitation seems natural, and most importantly, how to break free and act with clarity, confidence, and courage. If you have ever felt trapped by indecision or paralyzed by self-doubt, this video is for you. So before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next, because today, you will discover the way to move through fear instead of letting it control your life. In the mid-1600s, a man named Miyamoto Musashi walked alone through the rugged mountains of Japan, a figure both feared and revered across the land. He had faced dozens of opponents, each duel a test of life and death, and yet he had never been defeated. But it was not raw strength or perfect technique that allowed him to emerge victorious time and time again. It was something far subtler, far deeper than the clash of swords or the precision of his strikes. Musashi had discovered the true nature of fear, and he had learned not merely to endure it, but to move through it with a clarity that most people could not even imagine. From the very first duel he fought at the age of 13, Musashi understood that hesitation is fatal. While his opponents weighed every possible move, questioned their instincts, and feared the outcome, Musashi acted. He moved with a fluidity born of complete presence, his mind unburdened by doubt, calculation, or anticipation of pain. In that instant, the sword in his hand was an extension of his awareness, not a tool of aggression, but a channel through which decisive action flowed without obstruction. This state, which he would later describe as Mushin, the mindless mind, was not empty in the sense of thoughtlessness, but empty of hesitation, fear, and hesitation's paralytic shadow. It was a mind free to respond wholly to the moment, unbound by what had happened before or what might happen next. Musashi's insight was not limited to duels. It was a profound understanding of the human condition. He realized that most people fight their battles before they even step onto the field, trapped by imagined consequences and the invisible chains of fear. This is the same trap that ensnares modern lives, where the danger is no longer a sword but a conversation left unsaid, a risk left unclaimed, a decision delayed until it feels safe to act. Musashi's brilliance lay in seeing that fear itself was not the enemy. The enemy was hesitation, the internal debate that makes the moment of action impossible. Over decades, Musashi honed this understanding into a philosophy that transcended combat. He trained relentlessly, not only to perfect his technique, but to cultivate a mind that could act without restraint, a consciousness that flowed with life instead of resisting it. He approached every duel not as a contest of skill but as an exercise in mastering the mind, in recognizing that victory comes not from overpowering the opponent, but from mastering the fear within. In each fight, he created a gap, however small, between hesitation and action, a gap that, for his opponents, never appeared. And in that fraction of a second, Musashi prevailed. To observe Musashi in action was to witness the extraordinary clarity that comes from total presence. His eyes never wavered. His body moved with a natural grace that belied the lethal precision of his strikes. Opponents who knew every technique, who had trained to anticipate every movement, found themselves disarmed not by strength, but by Musashi's ability to exist fully in the moment, responding with intuition and confidence rather than fear. The lesson he left was timeless. Strength without mastery of the mind is hollow, and courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward in spite of it. Musashi eventually retired from the battlefield, not out of fear or defeat, but because he had achieved the highest understanding of his art. In solitude, he wrote, painted, and sculpted, leaving behind teachings that continue to guide those who seek freedom from hesitation. His life demonstrates a truth that resonates far beyond the dueling grounds. The greatest victories are won not by overpowering the world, but by mastering the self, by cultivating a mind that acts decisively, and by understanding that hesitation, not the challenges we face, is what truly limits us. In this way, Musashi's life becomes a mirror for anyone trapped in the cycles of fear and indecision, showing that the path to mastery lies not in avoiding fear, but in embracing action with a mind free of its paralyzing grip, moving forward with unwavering clarity, and stepping fully into the moment, no matter the stakes. Lucas had always considered himself a decisive man, a professional who thrived on problem-solving and planning. Yet beneath his composed exterior lay a struggle few could see. Every time he faced a significant choice, whether it was hiring a new employee, addressing a failing project, or confronting a personal relationship that had long ceased to nourish him, he felt an almost invisible hand gripping his chest, a subtle pressure that left him paralyzed. It was not laziness, and it was not a lack of insight. Lucas knew exactly what needed to be done. Yet, between knowing and acting lay a chasm he could not bridge, and in that chasm, fear quietly reigned. The pattern of his hesitation was familiar, though he had never given it a name. First came the impulse, a clear, urgent sense that something must change, that a decision needed to be made, that the next step was right before him. The clarity of the impulse shone like a light, illuminating the path forward. But then fear would rise, not a fear of death or of tangible danger, but a creeping, insidious worry that whispered in his mind, what if it goes wrong? What if I regret it? What if others judge me? This fear was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, but it was enough to stall his momentum. Before long, his mind began negotiating, convincing him that delay was rational. I will wait for the right moment. I will prepare a bit more. I will think it over. Each excuse seemed sensible, a shield against an imagined disaster. Yet it was nothing more than fear masquerading as reason, buying time while the impulse waited and the opportunity dimmed. And when he finally postponed, the relief was immediate and intoxicating, a temporary reprieve that felt like safety. His brain, wired to protect him from harm, rewarded him for this avoidance, interpreting the pause as survival, reinforcing the very habit that kept him trapped. But relief was fleeting. Hours later, guilt emerged, gnawing quietly, a shadow following him like a second heartbeat. Why did not I do it? Why do I falter when others succeed? The guilt, though sharp, was insufficient to force action. Instead, it accumulated, layering his next decision with additional weight. And so the cycle repeated itself, each iteration growing more entrenched, each moment of hesitation breeding the fear that would greet him next time. Fear of the unknown multiplied, entwined with fear of failure, and Lucas found himself increasingly trapped in a loop that neither reasoning nor desire could escape. This pattern, he realized, was not a reflection of weakness but a universal mechanism that Musashi had long understood. The human brain, shaped over millennia to protect against immediate, tangible threats, treats emotional discomfort as danger, responding with the same intensity it would if a predator lurked nearby. In modern life, where threats are rarely physical but often social, emotional, or professional, this ancient survival software misfires. Decisions that could transform a life are met with the same alarm as a life or death duel, and hesitation becomes a prison. Guilt its chains. Lucas saw that the key to breaking free was not to fight the fear directly, but to change his relationship with it, to recognize the cycle for what it was, a loop of instinct, habit, and misapplied protection. Understanding that the impulse to act was natural, that fear was inevitable, and that postponement offered only a mirage of safety, he began to step into moments of action differently. The moment he started noticing negotiation as fear in disguise, he could interrupt the loop, reclaim the space between impulse and hesitation, and take the first step toward freedom, transforming the invisible cycle that had long ruled him into a deliberate rhythm of choice and courage. Lucas had always assumed that the tightness in his chest before making important decisions was a personal flaw, a mark of weakness that set him apart from those who seemed to move through life with effortless confidence. Yet as he began to study fear, he discovered a truth that changed everything. His reactions were not unique. They were universal, deeply wired into the human brain. The same primitive mechanisms that once kept our ancestors alive on the savannah were still operating inside him, interpreting threats with a blunt precision that had no place for nuance. Every hesitation, every pang of anxiety before a difficult conversation or a bold career move, was the amygdala lighting up, signaling danger in a situation that, in reality, posed no physical risk. To this ancient part of the brain, the possibility of social rejection or professional embarrassment felt identical to a predator's strike, immediate and life-threatening. Lucas realized that the fear that had been holding him hostage for years was not a reflection of his courage or intelligence. It was a biological response honed over millennia, designed to protect him from visible danger, not to navigate modern life with all its abstract risks and subtle consequences. This understanding reframed his struggles entirely. The dread he felt before picking up the phone to make a difficult call, or the hesitation to confront a toxic relationship, was not evidence of failure, but a signal from a brain operating on ancient survival software. Each spike of fear, each racing heartbeat, was simply a misapplied instinct, an overzealous alarm system reacting to the potential of social discomfort as if it were a life or death threat. The insight was liberating because it revealed that his responses were normal, predictable, and most importantly, trainable. Lucas began to see the patterns in his life with new clarity. The paralysis he felt before taking action was amplified not just by the fear itself, but by layers of guilt, negotiation, and anticipation, all fueled by a brain convinced it was protecting him from catastrophe. Understanding this, he realized, was only the first step. The next was to learn how to work with the brain as instinctive wiring instead of fighting against it. By intentionally exposing himself to the discomfort of judgment, rejection, and failure, he could retrain his nervous system to recognize that these perceived threats were not fatal, that the alarm bells could sound without signaling real danger. He began small, deliberately putting himself in situations that triggered anxiety, observing his reactions without letting them dictate his actions. Each exposure was a lesson in resilience, a conversation initiated despite fear, a risk taken despite the anticipation of embarrassment, a decision made without the usual prelude of self-doubt. Over time, the amygdala's exaggerated response diminished, the ancient survival software recalibrated, and the paralysis that had once defined his life began to loosen its grip. In this process, Lucas discovered a profound truth. Courage was not the absence of fear, nor the conquest of it, but the willingness to act in the presence of fear, to move forward even when the brain screamed for caution. By understanding that the body's reaction to social and emotional threats was as intense as its reaction to physical danger, he could separate instinct from reality, fear from truth, and hesitation from necessity. What had once seemed insurmountable, the dread of judgment, the weight of potential failure, the anxiety before every pivotal choice, gradually became a navigable landscape, a challenge to be met with awareness and deliberate action rather than avoidance. Through this lens, Lucas' life transformed. No longer imprisoned by invisible alarms, he could step into moments of decision with clarity, respond to opportunities without delay, and act with the understanding that fear, while powerful, was not his master but a guide he could learn to navigate, a signal he could observe without surrendering to it. It was a revelation that linked his experiences directly to the wisdom of those who had understood fear long before him, a bridge between ancient insight and modern life, and the key to finally moving through the world with purpose instead of hesitation. Lucas had spent years trapped in a loop of hesitation, where every decision felt like a mountain and every action carried the weight of imagined catastrophe. Yet, as he studied the life of Miyamoto Musashi, he discovered that the paralysis he experienced was not insurmountable, and that centuries-old techniques could fundamentally change the way his mind responded to fear. Musashi had faced life and death duels hundreds of times, and he had never lost, not because he was stronger or faster than his opponents, but because he understood the inner mechanics of fear and had developed methods to act decisively in its presence. The first of these methods, Mushin, or the mindless mind, was deceptively simple yet profoundly transformative. It was not about being thoughtless or reckless. It was about creating a state of complete presence, where fear could not take root and hesitation had no foothold. Lucas began to see that his overthinking was the real enemy, the invisible opponent that paralyzed him before he could even start. By training himself to act in the moment, fully engaged but unburdened by doubts or what-ifs, he could bypass the spiral of fear and move forward with clarity and intention. Musashi's second principle, Ken, emphasized the importance of initiative, acting before the mind had time to argue, negotiate, or hesitate. Lucas realized that the minute he paused to prepare, rehearse, or convince himself of safety, fear had already planted its seed. The key was to act decisively, before the internal dialogue could sabotage him. He began experimenting with this principle in his own life, taking the initiative on decisions he had delayed for months. He made difficult calls, faced uncomfortable conversations, and pursued opportunities that had previously terrified him. The first moments were intense, the surge of fear undeniable, but he discovered a profound truth. When action precedes hesitation, fear loses its power, arriving too late to control the outcome. The third technique Musashi taught was the principle of familiarization with discomfort. Lucas learned that fear thrives on the unknown, and that repeated exposure to uncomfortable situations rewires the brain's perception of risk. He started small, asking for a discount on a purchase, initiating casual conversations with strangers, expressing opinions he would normally keep private. Each experience was a lesson, a signal to his nervous system that discomfort was not danger, that embarrassment and rejection were not fatal. Over time, the anticipated dread that had once stopped him in his tracks diminished, replaced by a growing sense of agency and resilience. By combining these techniques, Mushin, Ken, and deliberate familiarization with discomfort, Lucas began to retrain his brain. Decisions that had once paralyzed him became manageable. Challenges that had seemed insurmountable became opportunities for growth. And fear, while still present, no longer dictated his actions. He realized that mastery over fear was not about eliminating it, but about understanding it, working with it, and stepping into action despite it. These methods transformed his life in profound ways. Meetings that once caused anxiety became arenas of focus and composure. Conversations that had felt impossible became exercises in courage, and the weight of indecision lifted from his shoulders. Lucas discovered that the mindless mind was not a state achieved through passivity, but through practice. That initiative before hesitation was a skill honed through deliberate action, and that exposing oneself to discomfort was a pathway to freedom from the invisible chains of fear. In the end, what Musashi had taught, and what Lucas internalized, was a timeless truth. Fear will always exist, but it does not have to control the life you lead. With presence, initiative, and repeated exposure to the unknown, the mind can be trained to act decisively, to move through challenges with clarity, and to transform hesitation into momentum, proving that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. As Lucas continued to practice the principles of Musashi, he began to notice a profound transformation not just in his actions, but in his sense of self. Each time he faced a decision he had once avoided, each time he embraced discomfort rather than retreating from it, he shed layers of an old identity that had been quietly limiting him. The version of himself that hesitated, that feared judgment, that sought comfort at every turn, began to dissolve. He realized that true growth required saying goodbye to the identities he had clung to for years. The careful planner, the people pleaser, the one who waited for certainty before acting. These traits, once perceived as virtues, had been elegant masks for fear. Embracing discomfort became not a sporadic effort but a daily practice. Lucas learned that every small step into the unknown, whether it was speaking up in a meeting, initiating a difficult conversation, or taking a risk in his business, reinforced the truth that fear is not a permanent barrier but a signal to move through. Each act of deliberate action strengthened his confidence, and the paralyzing weight of indecision gradually lifted. What had once felt insurmountable became manageable, and the hesitation that had dominated his life was replaced by momentum and clarity. The most important lesson Lucas discovered was that freedom from fear does not come from waiting for it to disappear, nor from eliminating it entirely. That is impossible. Fear is a natural, unavoidable part of being human, and its presence does not indicate weakness. True freedom comes from acting in spite of fear, from choosing to move forward even when the mind and body resist. Every decision he made, every action he took while feeling fear, became a victory over the invisible chains that had held him captive for so long. The simple act of doing what must be done, without waiting for perfect conditions, rewired his mind and reshaped his life. In the months that followed, Lucas's transformation rippled through every area of his life. Relationships improved because he communicated honestly and directly instead of avoiding conflict. His career flourished because he took calculated risks instead of postponing critical moves. And most importantly, he experienced a sense of empowerment and presence that he had never known before, a freedom born not from the absence of fear, but from the mastery of it. He understood that each time he acted despite fear, he claimed a piece of his life that had previously been surrendered to hesitation. As you reflect on your own life, remember that hesitation, doubt, and fear are not signs that you are weak. They are reminders that growth requires courage, action, and the willingness to step into discomfort. The cycle of fear can be broken, but only if you choose to act. Only if you decide today to take the steps you have been avoiding. Like Lucas, you can transform your life by confronting fear head-on, embracing the discomfort that comes with change, and shedding the limiting identities that no longer serve you. Thank you so much for watching and for taking the time to invest in your own growth. If this video has inspired you or shifted the way you think about fear, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so we can continue exploring these ideas together. Share in the comments which fears you are committed to facing starting today, and join this journey of courage and transformation. Your next step is waiting. Do not let fear decide for you.